welcome to the Sacred Wild, our book club. And this week we are just starting the Celestine Prophecy. We finished I think it was called a critical mass. That's what it was called. It's kind of the preface last week. And this week we're actually starting the journey. It's called The Longer Now. Looks like it's page 17 in my book.
Okay. I got you.
And our usual format is we'll read for 30 minutes-ish and then discuss what we read. We try to land at a decent spot. So sometimes it's not exactly 30 minutes, but for a good spot to pick up next week.
Okay.
So we'll see how far we get.
Okay. The Longer Now. After a frenzy of packing and a wild ride on the freeway, I arrived at the airport with just enough time to pick up my ticket and board the flight for Peru. As I walked into the plane's tail section and sat down in a window seat, fatigue swept over me. I thought about a nap, but when I stretched out and closed my eyes, I found I couldn't relax. I suddenly felt nervous and ambivalent about the trip. Was it crazy to depart with no preparation? Where would I go in Peru? To whom would I talk? The confidence I had experienced at the lake was quickly fading back into skepticism, but the first insight in the idea of the cultural transformation again seemed fanciful and unrealistic. And as I thought about it, the concept of a second insight seemed just as unlikely. How could a new historical perspective institute or perception of these coincidences and keep them conscious in the public mind? I stretched out further and took a deep breath. Maybe it would be a useless trip. I concluded just a quick run to Peru and back. A waste of money perhaps, but no harm done. The plane jerked forward and taxied out to the runway. I closed my eyes and felt a mild dizziness as the big jet reached the critical speed and lifted into a thick cloud cover. When we reached the cruising altitude, I finally relaxed and drifted into sleep. 30 or 40 minutes later, a stretch of turbulence woke me up and I decided to go to the restroom. As I made my way through the lounge area, I noticed a tall man with round glasses standing near the window talking to a flight attendant. He glanced at me briefly, then continued speaking. He had dark brown hair and appeared to be about 45 years old. For an instant, I thought I recognized him, but after looking at his features closely, I concluded he was no one I knew. As I walked past, I could hear part of the conversation. Thanks anyway, the man said. I just thought since you travel to Peru so often that perhaps you had heard something about the manuscript. He turned away and walked toward the front of the plane. I was dumbstruck. Was he speaking about the same manuscript? I walked into the restroom and tried to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to forget about it. Probably he was talking about something else, some other book. I returned to my seat and closed my eyes again, content to write off the incident. Glad I didn't have to ask the man what he meant. But as I sat there, I thought about the excitement I had felt at the lake. What if the man actually had information about the manuscript? What might happen then? If I didn't inquire, I would never know. I wavered several more times in my mind, then finally stood and walked toward the front of the plane, finding him about midway up the aisle. Directly behind him was an empty seat. I walked back and told an attendant I wanted to move, then gathered my things and took the seat. After a few minutes, I tapped him on the shoulder. Excuse me, I said. I heard you mention a manuscript. Were you speaking of the one found in Peru? He looked surprised, then cautious. Yes, I was, he said tentatively. I introduced myself and explained that a friend had been in Peru recently and had informed me of the manuscript's existence. He visibly relaxed and introduced himself as Wayne Dobson, an assistant professor of history from New York University. As we spoke, I noticed a look of irritation coming from the gentleman sitting next to me. He had leaned back in his seat and was attempting to sleep. Have you seen the manuscript? I asked the professor. Parts of it, he said. Have you? No, but my friend told me about the first insight. The man beside me changed his position. Dobson looked his way. Excuse me, sir. I know we're disturbing you. Would it be too much trouble for you to exchange seats with me? No, the man said. That would be preferable. We all stepped into the aisle, and then I slid back into the window seat, and Dobson sat beside me. Tell me what you heard concerning the first insight, Dobson said. I paused for a moment, trying to sum up in my mind what I understood. I guess the first insight is an awareness of the mysterious occurrences that change one's life, the feeling that some other process is operating. I felt absurd as I said it. Dobson picked up on my discomfort. What do you think of that insight? He said. I don't know, I said. It didn't it doesn't quite fit with our modern day common sense, does it? Wouldn't you feel better dismissing the whole idea and getting back to thinking about practical matters? I laughed and nodded affirmatively. Well, that's everyone's tendency. Even though we occasionally have the clear insight that something more is going on in life, our habitual way of thinking is to consider such ideas unknowable and then to shrug off the awareness altogether. That's why the second insight is necessary. Once we see the historical background to our awareness, it seems more valid. I nodded. Then, as a historian, you think the manuscript's prediction of a global transformation is accurate? Yes. As a historian? Yes. But you have to look at history in the correct way. He took a deep breath. Believe me, I say this as one who has spent a lot of years studying and teaching history in the wrong way. I used to focus solely on the technological accomplishments of civilization and the great men who brought about the progress. What's wrong with that approach? Nothing, as far as it goes. But what's really important is the worldview of each historical period, what the people were feeling and thinking. It took me a long time to understand that. History is supposed to provide knowledge of the longer context within which our lives take place. History is not just the evolution of technology, it is the evolution of thought. By understanding the reality of the people who came before us, we can see why we look at the world the way we do and what our contribution is toward further progress. We can pinpoint where we come in, so to speak, in the longer development of civilization, and that gives us a sense of where we are going. So funny because we do that in so many other areas, but not in history.
Right.
He paused, then added, the effect of the second insight is to provide exactly this kind of historical perspective, at least from the point of view of Western thought. It places the manuscript's predictions in a longer context that makes them seem not only plausible, but inevitable. I asked Dobson how many insights he had seen, and he told me only the first two. He had found them, he said, after a rumor about the manuscript prompted a short trip to Peru 3 weeks ago. Once I arrived in Peru, he continued, I met a couple of people who confirmed the manuscript's existence, yet seemed scared to death to talk much about it. They said that the government had gone a little loco and was making physical threats against anyone who had copies or dispersed information. His face turned, that made me, but later a waiter at my hotel told me about a priest he knew who often spoke of the manuscript. The waiter said the priest was trying to fight the government's effort to suppress the artifact. I couldn't resist going to a private dwelling where this priest supposedly spent most of his time. I must have looked surprised because Dobson asked, what's wrong? My friend, I replied, the one who told me about the manuscript, learned what she knew from a priest. He wouldn't give his name, but she talked with him once about the first insight. She was scheduled to meet with him again, but he never showed up. It may have been the same man, Dobson said, because I couldn't find him either. The house was locked up and looked deserted. You never saw him? No, but I decided to look around. There was an old storage building in the back that was open for some reason. I decided to explore inside. Behind some trash, under a loose board in the wall, I found translations of the first and second insight. He looked at me knowingly. You just happened to find them? I asked. Yes. Did you bring the insights with you on this trip? He shook his head. No, I decided to study them thoroughly and then leave them with some of my colleagues. Could you give me a summary of the second insight? I asked. There was a long pause. Then Dobson smiled and nodded. I guess that's why we're here. The second insight, he said, puts our current awareness into a longer historical perspective. After all, when the decade of the 90s is over, we'll be finishing up not only the 20th century, but a 1,000-year period of history as well. We'll be completing the entire second millennium. Before we in the West can understand where we are and what is going to occur next, we must understand what has really been happening during this current 1,000-year period. What does the manuscript say exactly? I asked. It says that at the close of the second millennium, that's now, we will be able to see that entire period of history as a whole, and we will identify a particular preoccupation that developed during the later half of this millennium. In what has been called the modern age, our awareness of the coincidences today represent a kind of awakening from this preoccupation. What's the preoccupation? I asked. He gave me a mischievous half smile. Are you ready to relive the millennium? Sure, tell me about it. It's not enough for me to tell you about it. Remember what I said before. To understand history, you must grasp how your everyday view of the world developed, how it was created by reality of the people who lived before you. It took thousands of years to evolve the modern way of looking at things and to really understand where you are today. You must take yourself back to the year 1000 and then move forward through the entire millennium experientially, as though you actively lived through the whole period yourself in a single lifetime. How do I do that? I'll guide you through it. I hesitated for a moment, glancing out the window at land formations far below. Time was already beginning to feel different. I'll try, I said finally. Okay, he replied. Imagine yourself being alive in the year 1000 and what we have called the Middle Ages. The first thing you must understand is that the reality of this time is being defined by powerful churchmen of the Christian church. Because of their position, these men hold great influence over the minds of the populace. In the world these churchmen describe as real is above all spiritual. They are creating a reality which places their idea about God's plan for mankind at the very center of life. Visualize this, he continued. You find yourself in a class of your father, essentially peasant or aristocrat, and you know that you will always be confined to this class. But regardless of which class you're in or the particular work that you do, you soon realize that social position is secondary to the spiritual reality of life as defined by churchmen. Life is about passing a spiritual test, you discover. The churchman explained that God has placed mankind at the center of his universe, surrounded by entire cosmos, for one solitary purpose, to win or lose salvation. And in this trial, you must correctly choose between two opposing forces, the force of God and the lurking temptations of the devil. I'll let you take it.
Right on, thank you. But understand that you don't have to face this contest alone, he continued. In fact, as a mere individual, you aren't qualified to determine your status in this regard. This is the province of the churchmen. They are there to interpret the scriptures and to tell you every step of the way, whether you are in accordance with God or whether you're being duped by Satan. If you follow their instructions, you are assured that a rewarding afterlife will follow. But if you fail to hear the course they prescribe, then, well, there is excommunication and certain damnation. Dobson looked at me intensely. The manuscript says that the important thing is to understand here is that every aspect of the medieval world is defined in otherworldly terms. All the phenomena of life, from the chance thunderstorm or earthquake to the success of crops or the death of a loved one, is defined either as the will of God or as a malice of the devil. There is no concept of weather or geological forces or horticulture or disease. All that comes later. For now, you completely believe the churchman. The world you take for granted operates solely by spiritual means. He stopped talking and looked at me. Are you there? Yes, I can see that reality. Well, imagine that reality now beginning to break down. What do you mean? The medieval worldview, your worldview, begins to fall apart in the 14th and 15th centuries. First, you notice certain improprieties
Impropriety.
on the part of the churchmen themselves, secretly violating their vows of chastity, for example, or taking gratuities to look the other way when government officials violate scriptural laws. These improprieties alarm you because these churchmen hold themselves to be the only connection between yourself and God. Remember, they are only interpreters of the scriptures, the sole arbitrators of your salvation. Suddenly, you are in the midst of an outright rebellion. A group led by Martin Luther is calling for a complete break from papal Christianity. The churchmen are corrupt, they say, demanding an end to the churchman's reign over the minds of the people. New churches are being formed based on the idea that each person should be able to have access to the scriptures personally and to interpret them as they wish, with no middlemen. As you watch in disbelief, the rebellion succeeds. The churchmen begin to lose. For centuries, these men redefined reality, and now, before your eyes, they are losing their credibility. Consequently, the whole world is being thrown into question. The clear consensus about the nature of the universe and about humankind's purpose here, based as it was on the churchman's description, is collapsing, leaving you and all the other humans in Western culture in a very precarious place. After all, you have grown accustomed to having an authority in your life to define reality. And without the external direction, you feel confused and lost. If the churchman's description of reality and the reason for human existence is wrong, you ask, then what's right? He paused for a moment. Do you see the impact of this collapse on people today? I suppose it was somewhat unsettling, I said. To say the least, he replied. There was a tremendous upheaval, and the old worldview was being challenged everywhere. In fact, by the 1600s, astronomers had proved beyond a doubt that the sun and the stars did not revolve around the earth, as maintained by the church. Clearly, the earth was only one small planet orbiting a minor sun in a galaxy that contained billions of such stars. He leaned toward me. This is important. Mankind has lost its place at the center of God's universe. See the effect this had? Now, when you watch the weather, or plants growing, or someone suddenly die, what you feel is an anxious bafflement. In the past, you might have said God was responsible or the devil. But as the medieval worldview breaks down, that certainly goes with it. All the things you took for granted are now need new definition, especially the nature of God and your relationship to God. With that awareness, he went on, the modern age begins. There is a growing democratic spirit and a mass disrupt of papal and royal authority. Definitions of the universe based on speculation or spiritual faith are no longer automatically accepted. In spite the loss of certainty, we didn't want to risk some new group controlling our reality as the churchmen had. If you had been there, you would have participated in the creation of a new mandate for science. What? He laughed. You would have looked out on this vast, undefined universe, and you would have thought, as did the thinkers of that day, that we needed a method of consensus building, a way to systematically explore this new world of ours. And you would have called this new way of discovering reality a scientific method, which is nothing more than testing an idea about how the universe works, arriving afterward at some conclusion, and then offering this conclusion to others to see if they agree. Then, he continued, you would have prepared explorers to go out into this new universe, each armed with the scientific method, and you would have given them their historic mission. Explore this place and find out how it works and what it means that we find ourselves alive here. You knew you had lost your certainty about a God-ruled universe, and because of that, your certainty about the nature of God himself. But you felt you had a method, a consensus-building process through which you could discover the nature of everything around you, including God, and including the true purpose of mankind's existence on the planet. So you sent these explorers out to find the true nature of your situation and to report back. He paused and looked at me. The manuscript, he said, says that at this point we began the preoccupation from which we are awakening now. We sent these explorers out to bring back a complex explanation of our existence. But because of the complexity of the universe, they weren't able to return right away. What was the preoccupation? Put yourself in that time period again, he said. When the scientific method couldn't bring back a new picture of God and of mankind's purpose on the planet, the lack of certainty and meaning affected Western culture deeply. We needed something else to do until our questions were answered. Eventually, we arrived at what we seemed to be a very logical solution. We looked at each other and said, well, since our explorers have not yet returned with our true spiritual situation, why not settle into this new world of ours while we are waiting? We are certainly learning enough to manipulate this new world for our own benefits. So why not work in the meantime to raise our standard of living, our sense of security in the world? He looked at me and grinned, and that's what we did. 4 centuries ago, we shook off our feelings of being lost by taking matters into our own hands, by focusing on conquering the earth and using its resources to better our situation. And only now, as we approach the end of the millennium, can we see what happened. Our focus gradually became a preoccupation. We totally lost ourselves in creating a secular security, an economic security, to replace the spiritual one we had lost. The question of why we were alive, of what was actually going on here spiritually, are slowly pushed aside and repressed altogether. He looked at me intensely, then said, working to establish a more comfortable style of survival has grown to feel complete in and of itself as a reason to live. And we're gradually, methodically, forgotten our original question. We've forgotten that we still don't know what we're surviving for. How much is left? This is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, there's 10 more pages to get to the end of the chapter. Think we can dig it?
Well,
15 minutes?
10 pages in 15 minutes? You can try?
Should we get that far? We have only read 10 pages.
Okay.
Out the window, far below, I could see a large city. Judging from our flight path, I suspected it was Orlando, Florida. I was struck by the geometric outline of the streets and avenues, the planned and ordered configuration of what humans had built. I looked over at Dobson. His eyes were closed and he appeared to be asleep. For an hour, he had told me more about the second insight. Then our lunch had arrived and we had eaten, and I had told him about Charlene and why I had decided to come to Peru. Afterward, I wanted only to gaze out at the cloud formations and consider what he had said. So what do you think? He asked suddenly, looking sleepily over at me. Have you grasped the second insight? I'm not sure. He nodded toward the other passengers. Do you feel as if you have a clearer perspective on the human world? Do you see how preoccupied everyone has been? This perspective explains a lot. How many people do you know who are obsessed with their work, who are a type A or have stress related diseases and who can't slow down? They can't slow down because they use their routine to distract themselves, to reduce life to only its practical considerations. And they do this to avoid recalling how uncertain they are about why they live. It's kind of fucking me up, if I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Especially after our conversations this weekend. Like this this book
Yeah.
really is on time.
Right.
The second insight extends our consciousness to the second insight extends our consciousness of historical time. He added, it shows us how to observe culture not just from the perspective of our own lives, but from the perspective of a whole millennium. It reveals our preoccupation to us and so lifts us above it. You have just experienced this longer history. You now live in a longer view, in a longer now. When you look at the human world now, you should be able to clearly see this obsessiveness, the intense preoccupation with economic progress. But what's wrong with that? I protested. It's what made the Western civilization great. He laughed loudly. Of course, you're right. No one's saying it was wrong. In fact, the manuscript says preoccupation was a necessary development, a stage in human evolution. Now, however, we've spent enough time settling into the world. It's time to now wake up from the preoccupation and reconsider our original question. What's behind life on this planet? Why are we really here? I looked at him for a long time and then asked, do you think the other insights can explain his purpose? Dobson cocked his head. I think it's worth a look. I just hope no one destroys the rest of the manuscript before we have a chance to find out. How could the Peruvian government think that they could destroy an important artifact and get away with it? I asked. They would do it covertly, he replied. The official line is that the manuscript doesn't exist at all. I would think the scientific community would be up in arms. He looked at me with an expression of resolve. We are. That's why I'm returning to Peru. I represent 10 prominent scientists, all of whom demanded that the original manuscript be made public. I sent a letter to relevant department heads within the Peruvian government telling them that I was coming and that I expected cooperation. I see. I wonder how they'll respond. Probably with denials, but at least there will be an official start. He turned away, deep in thought, and I stared out the window again. As I looked down, it dawned on me that the airplane on which we were riding contained within its technology 4 centuries of progress. We had learned so much about manipulating the resources we had found on the earth. How many people, I mused, how many generations did it take to create the products and the understanding that enabled this airplane to come into being? And how many spent their whole lives focused on one tiny aspect, one small step, without ever lifting their heads from that preoccupation?
Can I just say,
Yeah,
that I love how much that goes with the Buddhist philosophy of how everything is made up of its parts.
right,
Do you catch
right.
that?
Yeah. Yeah, this is insane.
And isn't Sherlock's sidekick named Dotson?
Yes, I never got into Sherlock Holmes, but I think his was Dobson.
It is for okay, anyway, keep going.
Suddenly, in that instant, the span of history Dobson and I had been discussing seemed to integrate fully into my consciousness. I could see the millennium clearly, as though it was part of my own life history. 1,000 years ago, we had lived in a world where God and human spirituality were clearly defined, and then we had lost it. Or better, we had decided there was more to the story. Accordingly, we had sent explorers out to discover the real truth and to report back. And when they had taken too long, we had become preoccupied with a new secular purpose, one of settling into the world, of making ourselves more comfortable. And settle we had. We discovered that metallic ores could be melted down and fashioned into all kinds of gadgets. We invented sources of power, first steam and gas, then electricity and fusion and fission. We systemized farming and mass production, and now commanded huge stores of material goods and vast networks of distribution. Propelling it all was a call to progress, the desire of the individual to provide his own security, his own purpose, while he was waiting for the truth. We had decided to create a more comfortable and pleasurable life for ourselves and our children. And in more than 400 years, our preoccupation had created a human world where all comforts of life could now be produced. The problem was that our focused, obsessive drive to conquer nature and make ourselves more comfortable had left the natural systems of the planet polluted and on the verge of collapse. We couldn't go on this way. Dobson was right. The second insight did make our new awareness seem inevitable. We were reaching a climax of our cultural purpose. We were accomplishing what we had collectively decided to do. And as this happened, our preoccupation was breaking down and we were waking up to something else. I could almost see the momentum of the modern age slowing as we approached the end of the millennium. A 400-year-old obsession had been completed. We had created the means of material security, and now we seemed to be ready, poised, in fact, to find out why we had done it. The faces of the passengers around me could see evidence of the preoccupation, but also, I thought, I detected brief glimpses of awareness. How many, I wondered, had already noticed the coincidences? You want to read for a little while?
Yeah, but I mean, why don't we take a
Oh,
minute?
we could stop there.
Well, no. If we have more time, we can read more, but we just read like a
Well,
huge.
that's just what we just read, and then we'll talk until the end. So whenever we want to stop,
Okay.
whenever we want to stop, we're at 7:10 now, though, so we only got like 20 minutes left. We could totally stop.
When
I got
um
plenty stuck in my head at this moment, anyway.
yeah, because the next break isn't until the end of the chapter.
Right. Yep, I'm good with that. Holy shit! I love it because the first thing I marked, and it was the only thing I marked, but
Yeah, go ahead.
I stretched out further and took a deep breath. Maybe it would be a useless trip, I concluded. Just a quick return, just a quick run to Peru and back. What a waste of money, perhaps, but no real harm done. It's like our incessant drive to justify our actions and completely unaware that every next step is life changing. That was the very first, the third paragraph in the beginning of the chapter. Like,
Yeah,
oh, well, fuck it. If nothing else, it'll be a fun trip. You know,
yeah,
like, no, every step I've ever taken has changed my life entirely. But I
yes,
always justify it with this belief or this undertone of, oh well, it'll be fun. We'll see what happens. Probably no waste of time, but it'll be fun.
yeah. Which isn't that what we call the ego?
Sure, sure, yeah,
I mean, well, and it kind of runs into what they're saying, where like we then when they pulled away from God, right? Then they had to create their own sense of security, and so as a human society, I said they, we, I don't know, but as a human society, had to create our own sense of security, and so in a small way, we do that in our heads too, with each choice that we have to
right,
feel here. I mean, most people don't make a choice moving forward that they can't justify in their head is a secure choice. I mean, even Dahmer, unfortunately.
right, right,
So it's interesting how it works on such a grand scale and literally what is mentally, psychologically happening on a moment to moment, day to day basis with each choice.
right. Yeah, no, it's crazy how everything has such a what's the word for that? Like macro kickback and a micro kickback, like everything, whether it's internal or globally,
Yes.
every one of these thoughts is parallel to it has its parallel from my soul to the planet, like it. And
Yes.
that's what I'm seeing in this, in the rest of this reading, is like, not only this is exactly what I feel, like this book is like letting something out of me.
Yes.
This whole concept is, I mean, I can, this is real, this is definitely what's going on. And now it's time, and we've had, every podcast I watch is, like this whole push with the elections coming and all this next shift in who knows what direction we're going to go this time. and
Right.
and it's like there's a giant percentage of us that are like, it doesn't matter, because we need to go back to hunter gatherer, we need to go back to supporting ourselves as a community, we need to stop demolishing the natural resources and go back to just being content with what the planet has to offer us. But then on the backside of that, and this is where Jen always keeps me in check, is there's a reason for this. Like, there's a reason for this technology that we've created. It's going to propel us somewhere,
Well, and
and
it already has propelled us to at least a place where we get to watch podcasts of other people who have similar viewpoints and ideas as we do. And so it gets a little bit more difficult for the government, say, to suppress a global conscious awakening if
right,
we can have conversations about it collectively, regardless of what they what their motivations are or desires are or pocketbooks are.
right.
um you know Joe
When was
Dispenza
this?
walk.
1993. So this was before the huge shift of technology. Like, this manuscript in 93 could have been suppressed, but in 23 and today, it, there's no way this kind of information would have been suppressed. It would have been it would
Well,
have been broadcast on national, on the internet.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like the
Yeah,
cuneiform texts from the Sumerians, like that kind of stuff. Now we get, it's
yeah,
exposed.
yes,
all
absolutely.
these all these preoccupations that they keep discussing
Yeah,
have lost their, except for the, and I don't mean this offensively, but it could be very offensive, except to the blind who aren't willing to open. I mean, I have a lot of family who just accept that what the Bible says and what their church expresses is everything. And that's not, that's just not how I perceive life. There's more to our history. There's more to this. I mean, and this book is kind of showing that, like,
yeah.
there's more going on. Look at it in a 1,000-year period instead of in this decade or whatever.
Well, and it's the same thing with even if you don't take it back to like Christianity and the church, it's the same thing with materialists, right? So it even touched on that. So it went, okay, so we're not giving into just what the church is saying. So now we're going to create our own sense of security, which is every man out for themselves, and you use and abuse the planet. And yet the seeking continues, which is why there's never enough, right? Because
Right,
there is something greater. There is nothing fills that what we know is called God-sized hole, right?
right,
So it's whether it's people whether it's people at church, whether it's materialists, whether it's celebrities. And I don't want to put a blanket statement out there that like none of these groups care about what's the bigger world or whatever. But, you
Right,
know,
right. That's fair.
in the theme of like what the book is saying, um, yes, absolutely. It's the, and like what we just said, like the technology helps that things like this cannot be suppressed, and that people who do want to dig deeper and know more than what is easily fed to us are able to connect, and do so like we are right now.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure. And it's becoming such a bigger section of life of people that are exploring with different vision instead of being clouded by what we've already uh-oh. Did you miss your table?
No, it just like tipped over the table, but the cap come off. So thankfully not all over my electronics. That's a good mug, Yeti. Back to
Right,
the I'm sorry, what were you saying?
super top heavy, nothing. I'm trying to find another
Yeah,
spot of contention.
of contention.
I
I couldn't find my highlighter right before we started.
know I grabbed a marker, but the first time I marked in it, it bled
Yes.
right through. So I'm like, nope, not using that one.
Yeah, I can't ever read without a highlighter.
I get stumped because I forget what we read. I just have all kinds of emotions that came with it.
That's why I was wondering if it might make more sense to like read a couple, like read a little bit, talk about that little bit, read a little bit, talk about that little bit, you know?
Yeah, I've discussed that, but this is where we've landed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's hard for me. I think you nailed it. I just need to read with a highlighter, and but when I'm reading, it's hard for me to pause and highlight. That's
Exactly.
another factor. When
Yeah.
you're reading or somebody else is reading, then I can highlight along the way.
Yeah. But even me, like, you know, my memory, and I'm still like, it's just all a big
Right.
holy shit in my head.
I think it would have been super cool to be a fly on the wall on that plane. You know what I mean? To be a passenger on that plane and to be hearing this secondhand, just like we're reading it now, but to hear these two talking about this manuscript and this shift of because what's baffling to me in the world we live in, you know, when I go to work or when I was working at that last job in an office and like how many people just don't have a clue. They're and this is painting it as that preoccupation, but they're so preoccupied with their life, their kids in football, their church, their hobbies, that the grand scheme doesn't come into play. The damage we're doing to the planet, or the what are we here for questions outside of predestined answers, like already written answers. There's no more. It's like people aren't willing to. There's so many people that aren't willing to question. And I don't know. I don't know if it's, and maybe I'm just in a specific group of thinkers, but I've always had these questions. I've always said there's more to that story. I
Right.
spent the first half of my life in Christianity. You know what I mean? Like, and even through all that, there was always this undertone of, wait a minute, that that doesn't make sense, or that answer doesn't answer the question. And most people around me in that point in life were like, no, that's the answer. It's right here. But that's not the answer. Do you logically see? I mean, because some of it is just pure logic. It logically is not the answer.
Well, and I mean, there's also a huge portion of society that's even gone away from religion and gone away from spirituality. It's like they're so tired of
Yeah.
it, the fight between what's right, then it almost in a in a self-preservation way is like, then I'm just going to take care of my family. And there's plenty of, I mean, I believe, this is just in my head, that there are plenty of people who find so much meaning in family that does represent the greater existence of love and consciousness and God, and
And it's
plays
enough to stop.
and that's the meaning to them.
Right. Right.
And
And it's enough to stop. Right. Yeah, I see that.
that they
I don't
actually,
I wish I could be there. I do. I have that, like, there's this wish in me. There's this desire in me not to be the seeker that I am. You know what I mean? Because it's a lot of fucking work, and it's a lot of fear, and it's a lot of anxiety, and it's a lot of all this stuff, but I can't just settle in. I've tried,
yeah.
and it doesn't work for me. It
Well, and what it is like meaning for you and meaning for me is understanding this stuff,
Yeah.
where meaning for the grandfather with 9 grandkids who, spent his whole life working and making sure there was food on the table and kissing his wife when he came home from work, and is still acting out the same thing that we're grasping at.
I but yes, I can see, I can understand that, but it doesn't, it but it's not for
Not
this
for,
head.
that's
Right.
why
Yeah.
everybody has their own outlets. That's why it's all perfect, is what I'm saying.
Right.
That we need the we need the people and the families who, are just, doing what they're doing and finding meaning in this world, and the scientists who, need to challenge, and, there no black without white, like all of that stuff. It's all perfect.
It's
It's
all
all,
perfect.
in our ride in this lifetime or this journey or whatever, is that we're not satisfied, without understanding our meaning and purpose, which is this,
Right. Yeah.
uh, so I mean, I think there's plenty of people out there that are are very empty because they're seeking it in different ways, but I think there's people out there that are very fulfilled, not
Absolutely.
not knowing this, very happy, very pleasant, very, treating their neighbors,
Yep.
nice, raising kids good, like, all of that stuff. And
Right.
that's for them. And neither is wrong or right, I don't think.
Right. I think that's, you nailed it though. It's all perfect. And it's all in love. And that's something that we've discussed
Yeah.
several times, is the concept that everybody's everybody's undertone motivation is the greater good. And I know that's a hard statement to swallow. We've dug into that. But
Yeah.
it's reality that everybody's doing it for doing their part for what they believe is the greater good, and that's love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what else. I don't
Really
know at
got.
this. Yeah, 5 more minutes. It looks at this point, I like that they're just digging at the fact. And it's funny too, because it's the movie was such a trip. It was. I might need to watch it again in a different frame of mind, but it was fun to watch and to get the premise. I'm super excited to get my version now. You know what I mean? I get to make a better storyline from reading it.
Yeah, I bet even more so like after I feel like this is a book that I can see why Jen's read it more than once.
Well, and there's three more too. It's four. I think they were talking that there's four in the series. There's four books in the series or whatever.
Interesting.
I don't know that it's a series, but there's four more books that come consecutively.
Yeah, I wish I could remember um what the insights were at the end of the movie, because today I was thinking, I was like, I feel like it's kind of like the four agreements, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like respect kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
But I can't remember what it
Right.
was.
I'll have to watch it in a different frame of mind.
That would probably be a good idea.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining me. I'm glad you decided to show up because I wasn't alone tonight.
Of course.
I guess Laura broke her toe or dislocated her toe or something last night. She's been struggling today, so she didn't join us. And then Jen's in her meeting. So
Uh,
now there's four of us. This is amazing. We went through a whole book with just Jen and I. So now I'm excited that there's more. It's gonna be
yeah,
fun.
yeah, it'll be fun. I'm excited too.
Yay.
Hmm.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us in almost another chapter. We will reconvene next Wednesday at 6:30. What is this? Mountain Standard Time, Arizona time.
Okay.